The day had felt heavier than usual, though Patricia Wilder couldn't say why. Maybe it was the way the late autumn light slanted through the kitchen window, too golden, like it knew something she didn't. She stood in front of the cracked mirror in a red dress she'd bought on clearance 2 years ago and never dared to wear. Tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight she had allowed herself one fragile shard of hope. Evan, 7 going on 17, watched from the doorway in his Spider-Man pajamas, holding up 2 different earrings like a tiny stylist. "You look like a princess, Mom." She laughed, the sound catching in her throat, and kissed the top of his curly head. Then her phone buzzed on the bathroom counter. Something came up. "Can't make it. Sorry. Robert." 8 words. No emoji. No call. No second chance. If you've ever put lipstick on for nobody, if you've ever told your child, "It's okay," while your heart quietly shattered, you're my people. Click the subscribe button and drop a little heart in the comments so we know we're not alone tonight. Patricia ordered pizza instead, forced brightness into her voice, told herself the dress could wait for another lifetime. She changed back into leggings and an old hoodie, curled up with Evan on the couch, and let him pick the movie. For 90 minutes she almost believed normal was possible. Then Evan slid off the couch like his bones had turned to water. His lips went blue. His small hands clawed at his throat for air that wouldn't come. The ambulance ride was only 8 minutes but felt like 8 years. St. Augustine's ER was chaos and fluorescent hell, until suddenly it wasn't. A nurse with kind eyes guided her down a silent corridor. "We've moved him to a private room, ma'am. Courtesy of an anonymous donor." Patricia pushed the door open and the world tilted. There, in the dim blue glow of monitors, sat the man from the photo her coworker had shown her that afternoon. White dress shirt rolled to the elbows, an expensive watch catching the light, ink crawling up his throat like black flames. One large tattooed hand rested gently, impossibly gently, on her unconscious son's small arm. Storm gray eyes lifted to hers. He didn't look surprised to see her. He looked like a man who had already accepted that fate has a cruel sense of humor. Patricia's knees almost gave out. She knew that face. Knew the rumors that followed it. Knew the name whispered in the corridors of this very hospital when gunshot victims arrived with no questions asked. Robert Davis, head of the Davis Syndicate. The blind date who had canceled on her 90 minutes ago. And now he was here, guarding her child like the most dangerous angel she would ever meet. He spoke first, voice low enough that only she could hear, rough enough to cut straight through 6 years of careful walls. "I canceled so you'd stay alive, Patricia." A pause, heavy as gunfire. "I never imagined destiny would drag you straight into my war instead." The words hung between them like smoke after a gunshot. Patricia couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The monitors kept beeping, steady and indifferent, while her entire world narrowed to the sight of this man, this killer, holding her son's hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She found her voice somewhere near the floor. "Take your hand off my child." Robert didn't flinch. He simply lifted his gaze again, slow, deliberate, like a wolf deciding whether the threat in front of him was worth baring teeth for. Then he gently, so gently it hurt, released Evan's fingers and sat back in the plastic chair that looked ridiculous beneath his frame. "Patricia," he said, tasting her name like it was something rare. "Close the door." "No," the word cracked out of her, sharper than she intended. "You don't give me orders. You don't touch him. You don't." "I carried him in here," he cut in, voice low, almost tired. 2 blocks. He was turning blue in my arms before we even hit the lobby. I'm the reason he's breathing right now. The room spun. Patricia gripped the doorframe to stay upright. 12 hours earlier, before the red dress, before the canceled date, before any of this, Robert Davis had been standing in the back office of a butcher shop that hadn't sold actual meat in 15 years. The air smelled of bleach and old blood. Marco, his lieutenant, slid a phone across the steel table. "Remember the favor you called in with Sarah from accounting? The one who owed you for making her ex disappear from the planet?" Marco's grin was all teeth. "She says thank you, by the way. And she sent this." Robert glanced at the screen. A photograph. A woman in scrubs laughing at something off camera, tired eyes crinkled at the corners, hair escaping a messy bun. Something in his chest, something he'd buried under concrete and gunpowder a long time ago, shifted. "She's raising her kid alone," Marco said. "Good woman. Works double shifts at St. Augustine's." Sarah thought, maybe you could use someone who doesn't flinch at blood. Robert didn't answer. He just stared at the photo until the edges burned into his memory. For the first time in years, he let himself wonder what it would feel like to sit across from someone who didn't know the price of his soul. He told Sarah yes. One dinner. One chance to pretend he was just a man. Then he spent the next week finding reasons to cancel. Now, in the hospital room, Patricia's hands shook as she stepped fully inside and let the door click shut behind her. "Start talking," she whispered. "All of it." Robert looked at Evan, still unconscious, for dripping steadily, and something raw flickered across his face. "I was 2 blocks away," he began. "Farmers market on 9th. Settling a disagreement about territory lines. My men were watching the crowd. Then your boy walked out of the corner store with a juice box, took one breath, and dropped. He said it plainly, like he was reporting casualties. I got to him first. Picked him up. Ran. My doctor met us in the ambulance bay. Paid for this wing to be cleared. That's the short version." Patricia's pulse hammered in her ears. "Why were you even there?" His eyes flicked to hers, unreadable. "Because getting close to me is a death sentence, and I was trying to keep you safe." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you get tonight." Silence stretched, thick and dangerous. Evan stirred then. A small, broken sound escaped his throat. His eyelids fluttered. Patricia flew to the bed, brushing damp curls from his forehead. "Mommy!" His voice was paper-thin. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." Evan's gaze drifted past her, landing on Robert. A sleepy, wondering smile curved his mouth. "The man with the dragon on his neck," he murmured, voice raspy. "You saved me." Then, before Patricia could stop him, Evan reached out one small hand and curled it around 2 of Robert's tattooed fingers like it was the safest place in the world. Patricia felt her heart fracture clean in 2. Robert didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just stared at the tiny trusting fingers wrapped around his own like they were the most fragile thing he'd ever been handed. When he finally spoke, it was so quiet she almost missed it. "I've done things that would make you sick, Patricia. Things I can't take back. But I swear on whatever's left of my soul, no one touches this boy again. Not while I'm still breathing." He looked up then, and for one heartbeat the monster everyone feared disappeared, and all that was left was a man who had just been handed a reason to keep breathing. The monitors kept their steady rhythm, but the room felt suddenly too small, too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. Patricia stared at Evan's tiny hand still wrapped around Robert's fingers. Her son was asleep again, drugged and fragile, yet clinging to the most dangerous man she'd ever stood this close to. A soft knock. A doctor rumpled from the night shift stepped in, eyes flicking nervously to Robert before settling on Patricia. "We have the talk screen." He handed her a tablet. The words blurred, then sharpened into something cold and chemical. BZ variant incapacitating aerosol. Trace inhalation. Same signature compound used in the attempted hit on Mr. Davis's convoy 48 hours ago. The tablet slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. Patricia turned on Robert so fast the four-pole rattled. "My son was poisoned because of you." Robert didn't deny it. He simply rose, towering, unreadable, and nodded once to the doctor. The man vanished as if he'd never existed. "It wasn't meant for him," Robert said quietly. "It was a message meant for me. They followed my men, released it into the air near civilians." Evan walked through the cloud. Patricia's voice shook with rage and terror. "He's 7. I know." She stepped into him, fists clenched against his chest. "You should have stayed cancelled. You should have stayed gone." He let her hit him, once, twice, useless thumps against solid muscle. Then he caught her wrists, gentle but unbreakable. "I tried," he said. "I swear I tried." Behind them, 2 men in hospital security uniforms appeared at the door, except their shoes were too polished, their earpieces too discreet. Robert lifted his chin. They moved Evan's bed, for stand and all, down the corridor without a word. Patricia followed because there was nowhere else to go. Minutes later, they were in a locked wing that didn't officially exist. Cameras disabled. Windows bulletproof. 4 of Robert's men posted like silent statues. Patricia sank onto the plastic couch outside Evan's new room, head in her hands. Robert stayed standing, hands in his pockets, watching the hallway like he expected the walls to bleed. Hours crawled. Fluorescent lights buzzed. At 3:07 a.m., Patricia looked up and realized they were alone. She asked the question she'd been choking on since the moment she saw him. "Why do you even care about us?" He didn't answer right away. He walked to the window, stared out at the dark city he owned in every way that mattered, and for a long time the only sound was the soft hiss of Evan's oxygen. Then, so low she almost missed it. Because for 10 seconds, when I let myself imagine walking into that restaurant, sitting across from you, ordering whatever stupid overpriced wine you wanted, for 10 whole seconds I got to pretend I was just a man. He turned. The hallway light carved shadows across the ink on his throat. A man who could take a beautiful woman to dinner and maybe, if the night was kind, make her laugh. No blood, no deaths, no bodies, just normal. His voice cracked on the last word, the smallest fracture, gone before she could be sure she heard it. "I've never had normal, Patricia, but I wanted 10 seconds of it with you. And I was willing to burn the rest of my life to keep those 10 seconds clean." He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw it. Exhaustion older than his 38 years, grief he carried like a second skeleton. "I canceled the date to protect you," he said. "Turns out I brought the war to your doorstep anyway." Patricia's throat burned. She wanted to scream at him, to thank him, to fall apart. She didn't know which. Instead she whispered, "What happens now?" Robert's eyes went hard again, the mask sliding back into place. "Now I'll end it. Anyone who touched that canister dies before sunrise. And you and Evan stay breathing." He started to walk away. She caught his sleeve. The fabric was warm from his skin. "Robert." He stopped. "Don't become more of a monster trying to protect us." A ghost of something, Maybe a smile, maybe pain, touched his mouth. Too late for that, princess. He disappeared down the corridor, footsteps silent, shadows swallowing him whole. Patricia leaned her forehead against the cool wall and listened to her heart beat in a rhythm that no longer felt entirely her own. The hallway was still humming with the echo of his promise when the lights died. Not flickered. Died. Every fluorescent tube, every exit sign, every monitor in Evan's room went black at once. Then the first gunshot cracked, so loud it felt like the world splitting open. Patricia's body knew what to do before her mind caught up. She was inside the room, arms around Evan's bed, before the second burst shredded the silence. Robert was already there, a shadow made of muscle and fury. He slammed the door, through the lock, and shoved a heavy cabinet across it with one shoulder like it weighed nothing. "Volkov," he growled into the tiny mic at his collar. "How many?" The answer was lost under a storm of automatic fire chewing through the corridor walls. Glass exploded. Alarms howled. Somewhere a woman screamed, then cut off too fast. Robert dropped to one knee beside the bed, yanked a pistol from under his jacket, black, ugly, silenced, and looked at Evan's small form tangled in wires and blankets. "I swore I'd never do this in front of a kid," he muttered, almost to himself. Then louder to Patricia, "Eyes on me." She couldn't. She was shaking too hard. He cupped her face with one bloody-knuckled hand, forced her gaze to his. "Trust me for 5 minutes. Just 5. Another burst punched holes through the door. Plaster dust snowed down on them. Robert stood, turned his back to the bed, to her, to Evan, and became a wall. He fired 3 times, controlled, precise. Someone on the other side of the door stopped screaming. "Roof!" he barked into the mic now. He scooped Evan into his arms, for Stan dragging behind like a tail, wrapped the boy against his chest with one arm, and reached for Patricia with the other. "Run!" They ran. Corridor lights strobed red from emergency backups. Bodies in security uniforms, his men, lay twisted on the floor. Blood painted the walls in arterial spray. Robert never slowed. He shot one-handed, never looking, never missing. A Volkov soldier rounded the corner and raised a rifle. Robert put 2 rounds through his throat before the man finished aiming. Patricia's lungs burned. Her bare feet slipped in blood. She didn't feel it. Stairwell. Up, up. Robert kicked the rooftop door off its hinges. The night air hit like ice. A black helicopter waited, blades already thumping, no lights, no markings. 2 of his men waved them in, laying down cover fire that lit the dark in strobing orange. Bullets sparked off the helipad. One round clipped Robert's shoulder. He didn't flinch. He handed Evan to a crewman, then turned and lifted Patricia bodily into the cabin like she weighed nothing. Only when the door slammed and the bird lifted did he let himself bleed. They rose above the hospital as windows flashed with muzzle fire below, a war zone shrinking beneath them. Patricia's ears rang. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Evan was curled on a stretcher, unconscious again, oxygen mask fogging with every tiny breath. And Robert sat across from her, shirt soaked dark at the shoulder, jaw clenched against the pain, watching her like she was the only real thing left in the world. Something inside her snapped. She launched across the narrow space and slapped him so hard his head rocked sideways. The sound was swallowed by the rotors. Then she was sobbing, ugly, furious, terrified sobs, against the same chest she'd just struck. Blood from his wound seeped warm through her thin sweater. His arms came around her instantly, crushing, careful of Evan, careful of her breaking. "I've got you," he shouted over the engines. voice raw. "I've got you both now. No one touches you again. I swear on it in my life." She buried her face in the crook of his neck, tasting gunpowder and copper and something that felt terrifyingly like safety. Below them, St. Augustine's burned with emergency lights and sirens, a battlefield she never asked to stand on. Above them, the city blurred into black water and distant stars. And for the first time since the red dress came off its hanger, Patricia let herself be held by the most dangerous man alive. Because tonight, danger was the only thing standing between her son and the dark. The helicopter dropped out of the night and settled on a concrete pad ringed by pines so tall they swallowed the stars. Floodlights snapped on, harsh and white, revealing a sprawling lakeside estate that looked more like a military compound than a home. High stone walls, infrared cameras, men with rifles who melted back into the trees the moment Robert stepped out. He carried Evan the whole way, the boy's head lolling against his shoulder, for bags swinging from Robert's raised fingers like a lantern. Patricia followed barefoot across cold gravel, too exhausted to feel anything but the thud of her own heart. Inside, the house was quiet and warm, smelling faintly of cedar and gun oil. A doctor, one of Robert's, met them in a bedroom the size of Patricia's entire apartment. White sheets, soft lamplight, windows that looked out on black water. Evan was transferred to the bed. New lines run, monitors reconnected. Within minutes his color was better, his breathing deep and even. Robert stood at the foot of the bed long after the doctor left, staring like he couldn't quite believe the boy was still breathing. Patricia's legs gave out. She sank into an armchair and watched, numb, as Robert pulled a worn copy of Where the Wild Things Are from a shelf she hadn't noticed. He sat on the edge of the mattress, opened the book, and began to read in a voice so low and gentle it felt like a secret meant only for Evan. And he sailed off through night and day. His scarred, tattooed hand rested on Evan's ankle, thumb brushing back and forth like a metronome of safety. Evan never woke, but his mouth curved into the smallest smile. Patricia's eyes burned. She looked away so the tears wouldn't fall. Hours later, dawn still a rumor behind the mountains, she padded downstairs in borrowed socks and one of Robert's black t-shirts that hung to her knees. The kitchen was industrial steel and warm. Robert stood at the stove in sweatpants, hair a mess, pushing scrambled eggs around a pan with the same concentration he probably used to plan wars. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. "Only thing I can cook," he muttered, almost sheepish. "Protein. The kid needs protein." Found its way out yet? Upstairs, Evan's voice floated down, sleepy but bright. "Mom, Mr. Dragon said I could see the rest of his dragon when I woke up." Robert's mouth twitched, the closest thing to a smile she'd seen from him. Later, while Evan napped again and Robert disappeared to take calls in a locked room, Patricia wandered. She found herself in a study lined with books and old photographs. One drawer was unlocked. Inside, a stack of pictures wrapped in a child's drawing of a crooked sun. She lifted the first photo and the air left her lungs. 17-year-old Robert, taller, thinner, no ink yet, cradling a dark-haired baby in a christening gown. The boy's grin was huge and unguarded, the baby reaching for his face with chubby fists. On the back, in faded marker, Robbie and Nico, 2004. She knew the story without being told. Everyone in the city did. Nico Davis, 8 years old, caught in the crossfire of a war Robert hadn't started yet. The day the last soft part of Robert died with his little brother. Patricia's fingers shook as she put the photo back exactly as she'd found it. She found him on the porch at dawn, coffee gone cold in his hand, staring across the flat silver lake like it might give him answers. He didn't turn when her footsteps creaked the boards. I was supposed to protect him, he said to the water. I was 17. I thought I was invincible. One afternoon changed everything. The wind carried the scent of pine and cold water. Patricia stepped close enough to see the sheen in his eyes. He wasn't bothering to hide. I know what it's like to lose the one person who made you believe the world could be kind, she whispered. He turned then. The rising sun caught the wet tracks on his cheeks and turned them gold. She didn't think so. She just reached up, cupped his stubbled jaw, and kissed him. It was desperate and clumsy, tasting of salt and terror and too many almosts. His hands came up to cradle her face like she was something holy, and for a moment the lake, the guns, the blood, everything, disappeared. When they pulled apart, foreheads still touching, he breathed her name like a prayer he'd never earned the right to say. Patricia! She pressed her fingers to his lips. Not yet, she said. Just stay alive long enough for there to be a later. Behind them, inside the house, Evan's small voice called out, Mom? Mr. Dragon? The dragon woke up hungry. Robert closed his eyes, rested his brow against hers, and for the first time in 20 years let himself hope the story might still have a gentle page. The morning light on the lake was soft and forgiving, but Robert's eyes were already hard again. He stood at the foot of the bed watching Evan sleep, knuckling white around a black duffel bag, the weight of what he had to do settling back onto his shoulders like an old debt. Patricia felt the shift before he spoke. I have to finish it, he said quietly. 48 hours. Maybe less. The Volkovs won't stop until one side is ash. She wanted to argue, to beg, to chain him to the porch and pretend the world outside the pines didn't exist. Instead she only nodded, because Evan's small chest rose and fell under the blanket, and that was worth any price. Robert knelt beside the bed, brushed a curl from Evan's forehead with the same reverence he'd shown the first time he carried the boy. Then he stood and faced her. He pressed a cheap burner phone into her hand. One number programmed. Hi. If anything, one strange car, one wrong noise, one bad dream, feels wrong, you call. I don't care if I'm in the middle of putting a bullet in someone's skull. I will burn the city down to get back here. Do you understand me? His voice cracked on the last word. She nodded again, throat too tight for sound. He started to walk away. She caught his wrist. Robert. He stopped. Come back alive, she whispered. That's the only payment I want. Something fierce and fragile flashed across his face. He pressed his forehead to hers for one heartbeat, two, then he was gone. The front door closed with the finality of a coffin lid. The house felt too large without him. The first day passed in a haze of forced normalcy. Patricia read to Evan, changed his 4 bags with a nurse Robert left behind, let the boy trace the visible parts of the dragon tattoo on the bodyguard's neck, and laughed when the man pretended to roar. On the second morning she found an envelope on the kitchen island. Thick cream paper, no writing on the outside. Inside, a bank card, a printed statement, and a post-it in Robert's jagged handwriting. For Evan. Whatever he needs. Whatever you need. R. The balance made her sit down hard on the tile floor. $400,000. Transferred yesterday. Designated, Evan Wilder Medical and Education Trust. She stared at the numbers until they blurred. He had done it while carrying her son through gunfire, while bleeding from a bullet graze, while planning to walk into hell so they could stay in this quiet house by the lake. She was still sitting there when Evan padded in, barefoot, dragging the blanket like a cape. Mom, when's Mr. Dragon coming home? Soon, baby. She pulled him into her lap, even though he was getting too big. Really soon. That afternoon she wandered into the study again, restless, needing to feel close to Robert in the only way left. She opened the drawer with the old photos, then noticed a second, smaller drawer beneath it she hadn't seen before. Inside lay a single phone, older model, cracked screen. Unlocked. One unsent message, drafted the night of the cancel date. Time-stamped 6:47 p.m. I can't do this to you. You deserve candlelight and safety, not shadows and blood. Be happy, Patricia. Her name glowed in the darkroom like a wound. She read it over and over until the screen dimmed and the words were burned behind her eyelids. He had stood in some cold room somewhere, typing those lines with the same hands that later carried her dying son through the streets, and then he had chosen not to send them. Chosen to walk away so she could keep the small, clean life she'd fought for. All while quietly moving heaven and earth to make sure that life would never want for anything again. Patricia pressed the phone to her chest and cried, silent, shaking sobs that hurt her ribs. Because no one had ever loved her hard enough to break their own heart first. If you've ever been loved so fiercely that someone would rather tear themselves apart than let the darkness touch you, subscribe. Leave a heart. We protect our own here, and some of us are still learning that we're allowed to be protected too. She didn't hear the front door open hours later. She only felt the shift in the air, the way the house exhaled when its owner came home. Robert stood in the study doorway, still in the same black tactical clothes, smelling of gunpowder and winter night. Fresh bruises darkened his jaw. His eyes were bloodshot and ancient. But he was breathing. He looked at the phone in her hand, at the tears on her face, and something in him seemed to collapse inward. I didn't mean for you to find that, he rasped. Patricia crossed the room in 3 steps and kissed him like the world was ending and beginning at the same time. He tasted like copper and relief and every unspoken promise he'd carried alone. When they pulled apart, his voice was raw. It's done. Volkov's line ends tonight. No one's coming for you again. She rested her forehead against his. Good, she whispered. Because I'm keeping you. From the hallway came the thunder of small barefoot feet. Mr. Dragon. Evan launched himself at Robert's legs. You came back. Robert dropped to one knee, caught the boy, and held on like he was the only solid thing left in the universe. Yeah, kid, he said against Evan's curls. I came back. The house slept under a thin blanket of moonlight when the first window shattered. Patricia woke with her heart already in her throat. The bedside clock read 2:14 a.m. Evan was curled against her, warm and trusting, breathing soft. Then the second window downstairs exploded, followed by the unmistakable cough of a suppressed rifle. She rolled off the bed, dragging Evan with her, and shoved him into the narrow space between the dresser and the wall. Stay down, baby. Don't move. Don't make a sound. His eyes were huge, but he nodded. She crawled to the nightstand, fingers closing around the Glock Robert had made her practice with every afternoon for the last week. Cold, heavy, real. Footsteps on the stairs, too quiet, too confident. These weren't Volkov's men. They moved like they knew every corner of the house. Because they did. Robert had warned her this could happen. One of his own. Someone close enough to know the safe house, the rotation, the blind spots. The bedroom door eased open an inch. Patricia pressed her back to the wall beside it, raised the pistol with both shaking hands, and waited. A silhouette slipped inside, tall, familiar. Marco. Robert's lieutenant for 12 years. The man who had once carried Evan a juice box and asked about his dinosaur stickers. Marco's eyes swept the room, found the empty bed, and he smiled like he'd already won. Patricia stepped out and put the muzzle against the base of his skull. "Drop it," she whispered. He froze. The second intruder came in behind him, someone she didn't know, rifle already rising. Patricia didn't think. She pulled the trigger twice. The sound was enormous in the small room. Marco's head snapped forward. The second man dropped like someone cut his strings. Marco turned, stunned, blood pouring from the graze across his temple. He looked at her like she was a stranger. "You bitch!" He lunged. She fired again. Center mass. He hit the floor and stayed there. The room smelled of burnt powder and copper. Her ears rang so hard the world sounded underwater. Evan whimpered from his hiding spot. Patricia's legs gave out. She was still on her knees, gun dangling, when the front door slammed open downstairs and Robert's voice roared through the house like a wounded animal. "Patricia!" He took the stairs 3 at a time, gun drawn, eyes wild. He burst into the room and stopped dead. Marco bleeding out on the rug. 2 bodies. Patricia on the floor, covered in powder burns and someone else's blood, shielding Evan with her body. Robert's gun clattered to the hardwood. He crossed the room in 2 strides and dropped to his knees in front of her, hands hovering like he was afraid to touch her and discover she was already broken. "I never wanted you to become this," he rasped, voice cracking wide open. "Never. I swear to God." Patricia looked up at him. Her hands were steady now, impossibly steady. "You didn't make me this," she said. Her voice didn't even shake. "You made me safe enough to fight for the people I love." She let the gun fall from her fingers and reached for him instead. Robert pulled her into his arms so hard her ribs creaked. He buried his face in her hair and shook, great silent tremors that belonged to a man who had never cried in front of anyone until tonight. Evan crawled out from behind the dresser, eyes huge, and wrapped his small arms around both of them. They stayed there on the blood-wet floor, the 3 of them tangled together, breathing the same air, until the sun came up and painted the lake red behind the curtains. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say that their heartbeats hadn't already told each other. The rain started the moment they left the safe house, hard, cold, biblical, like the sky itself wanted to wash the blood away before it dried. Robert drove. Patricia sat beside him with the Glock on her lap, and Evan safe behind 3 locked doors and 6 armed men back at the lake. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to plan, nothing left to fear except the thing they were driving toward. The abandoned cathedral stood on the edge of the city, bombed-out ribs open to the night, stained glass long gone, only jagged holes where saints used to watch. Neutral ground. No guns bigger than sidearms. Old rules. Robert had sent the message through channels that still worked. Come alone or watch your empire burn street by street. Dmitri Volkov came. He waited in the nave beneath a roof that no longer existed, rain drumming on his shoulders, for lieutenants fanned out in the shadows. Robert stepped into the moonlight first, hands empty, coat open to show he was playing by the rules. Patricia followed 2 steps behind, rain plastering her hair to her face, gun in her hand but pointed at the ground. She had insisted, "If we're ending this, we end it together." Robert hadn't argued. He'd only looked at her like she was the bravest thing he'd ever seen. The talking lasted less than a minute. Then the shooting started. It was fast and ugly and louder than God. Muzzles flashed like lightning inside stone walls. Men fell screaming or silent. Patricia fired until the slide locked back, then used the gun like a club. Robert took a blade across the ribs and 3 rounds to the chest that the vest caught but still drove him to his knees. Dmitri came at him with a grin and a straight razor. Patricia saw the glint, saw Robert sway, and something ancient and maternal roared awake inside her. She tackled Dmitri from the side, drove her shoulder into his throat, felt the razor slice her forearm as they crashed into a pew. Robert found his feet, found his gun, and put 2 bullets through Dmitri's heart before the man could slit her throat. Then one more in the head, just to be sure. Silence fell, broken only by rain and the wet sound of Robert's breathing. He looked around at the bodies, at the ruined cathedral, at the woman he loved bleeding in the aisle, and the last of his strength left him. He went down hard. Patricia dropped beside him, hands flying over the wounds. The vest had stopped the chest shots, but the knife had gone deep under the ribs and the blood was hot and fast. "No," she said. "No, no, no." She dragged him, half carrying, half falling, into the nearest confessional booth still standing. The wooden door hung crooked. Rain dripped through the lattice. She shoved him onto the narrow bench and pressed both palms to the worst of the bleeding. "Look at me," she ordered, voice shaking. "You do not get to die in a church you don't even believe in." Robert tried to laugh. It came out wet. "Thought you wanted candlelight," he rasped. "Shut up." Tears mixed with rain on her face. "We haven't had Evan's 8th birthday yet. We haven't taught him how to ride a bike without training wheels. We haven't had lazy Sunday mornings or arguments about whose turn it is to do dishes or—" She pressed harder, sobbing now. "We haven't had a single ordinary day, Robert. You owe me ordinary. You owe me grocery lists and school plays and growing old enough to complain about our knees. So you stay." His hand found her wrist, slick with his blood. "Patricia, don't you dare say goodbye. I'm not." His voice was fading, but his eyes burned into hers. "I'm saying yes to every single one of those days. If you'll still have me." Sirens in the distance, his men coming to clean up the mess. She didn't care. She kissed him, tasting rain and blood and the future she refused to lose. He kissed her back like a man who had just been handed absolution. They found out later the knife had missed everything vital by millimeters. He would live. When the rain finally stopped, the cathedral was quiet except for dripping water and distant thunder. Robert pushed himself up from the confessional floor using the carved wooden rail for support. Patricia tried to help. He shook his head. He walked, slowly bleeding, unbroken, to the center of the aisle and went down on his knees in the puddle of moonlight and rainwater and someone else's blood. From his pocket he drew a simple platinum band, thin, scarred, made from bullets pulled out of his own men over the years, melted and reshaped into something new. He held it up to her with trembling, red-stained fingers. "Marry me," he said, voice rough and steady at once. "Not because the danger's gone, it never will be. Because even when it comes back, I want to stand in front of it as your husband. I want the ordinary days and the war zones and every single sunrise in between. I want them with you." Patricia looked down at the man who had carried her son through fire, who had bled for them, who had taught her that monsters can love harder than saints ever manage. She took the ring, slid it onto her own finger, and pulled him to his feet. "Yes," she said against his mouth, "but we're registering for new dishes. Those bullets have done enough damage." He laughed, actually laughed, even though it tore open the wound again. And somewhere above them, what was left of the cathedral roof let in a single shaft of moonlight that landed on them like a blessing neither of them had earned, but both of them were keeping anyway. 6 months later the lake was glass still, reflecting a sky the color of the red dress Patricia had finally worn again. They married on a Thursday morning in the smallest room the county courthouse had, the one with the squeaky fan and the plastic flowers someone kept forgetting to water. No guests except Evan, the judge, and a clerk who cried into her tissues because she'd read too many romance novels and this one felt real. Evan stood between them in a tiny charcoal suit, hair combed for once, clutching a velvet pillow with 2 rings tied on with blue ribbon. Pinned to his lapel was the silver dragon Robert had made from the melted bullets of that last winter, small enough for a child, fierce enough to remind the world who watched his back now. When the judge said, "You may kiss the bride," Robert didn't rush it. He cupped Patricia's face like she was still the miracle he hadn't earned, brushed the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs, and kissed her soft and slow in front of God and the county and their wide-eyed son. Evan tugged Robert's sleeve. "Do I get to kiss the bride too?" Robert lifted him up so Evan could plant a sticky kiss on Patricia's cheek. The judge laughed. The clerk sobbed harder. Somewhere outside, a janitor clapped. It was perfect. 5 months after that, Patricia stood in the doorway of the new free clinic downtown. Bright paint, clean floors, no appointments needed. The sign read Wilder Davis Children's Health Center in letters Robert had paid for with money that had never seen blood. She wore scrubs again, but this time they fit right and the name tape read Dr. Patricia Davis, M.D. She still worked double shifts sometimes, but now she came home to a house that smelled like pine and whatever Robert was burning in the kitchen, and to a little boy who ran to meet her shouting, "Mom's home," while a second before a much larger set of arms wrapped around her from behind. And now, on a quiet Sunday evening in early autumn, the 3 of them sat on the wide porch of the lakeside house watching the sun bleed gold across the water. Evan, 8 next month, was asleep across Robert's chest, tiny suit jacket abandoned, dragon pin glinting on his t-shirt, one fist curled against Robert's heart like he was holding it in place. Robert's hand covered Evan's completely, thumb stroking the boy's knuckles in slow, absent circles. Patricia leaned into Robert's side, head on his shoulder, fingers laced through his. The ring on her left hand caught the last light and threw it back like a promise kept. Robert's voice was barely more than a breath against her hair. "I canceled a date," he whispered, the words soft with wonder. "Fate sent me a family." She turned her face up to him, eyes shining. "You didn't just get a family," she said. "You became the man worthy of one." He kissed her temple, lingering, breathing her in like oxygen after years underwater. Somewhere down by the dock a loon called once, lonely and perfect. The sun slipped behind the pines, and the sky turned the color of the dress she'd worn the night everything began. Patricia rested her hand over both of theirs, 3 heartbeats under one palm, and felt the shape of forever settle gently into place.